The INSAR's protests of 2020 brought to the fore the dissatisfaction of many young Nigerians about sections of the Nigerian police force and issues of bad governance in the country more broadly. A grievance with arbitrary abuse of power by police, which began as a hashtag on Twitter in 2017, suddenly and unexpectedly burst onto the streets in many cities across the country and caught the world's attention. To me, the EndSARS protests were illustrative of two major trends in Nigerian politics that I believe are likely to shape the political landscape in the coming years. First, government's heavy-handed response to the protests that formed the temporary climax of efforts aimed at tighter control of the civic space in the interest of public security, a trend which in the meantime has, as we all know, culminated in the banning of Twitter in the country. And secondly, the growing desire among a young and mostly urban Nigerian population for fundamental change in how politics is conceived of and practiced towards a society in which political participation by women and men, transparency and accountability, as well as social justice are not just propagated, but actually put into practice. Though the protests may not have fully delivered on the expected outcomes and lost directions following the tragic events at the Lekki tollgate on October 20, they did showcase the determination, inventiveness, and the hunger for a better tomorrow among the country's youth. Importantly, the protests also saw young women leading in inspiring ways and standing tall in the face of intimidation. 1 year later, we believe there are important and interesting questions regarding the protests, political legacy, and the way forward to be reflected upon. For example, what is left of the momentum and the enthusiasm that we all felt about the possibility of change that the protests created at the time? Has it left a dent on the political structure, or at least on public mentality? Or was it just a political mayfly? What are some of the lessons for Nigerian politics and intergenerational relationships in Nigerian society? And in what ways can we create spaces for young activists and especially young women to exercise their rights without the fear of a backlash? And more broadly, how can we protect the civic space in Nigeria in the face of growing pressures? And looking towards the future also, how could the energy of the EndSARS protests be channeled in the context of the upcoming general elections in 2023? So to discuss these and related questions, we have a group of thinkers and activists who have agreed to share some of their thoughts and reflections and insights with us here today. And I would like to already thank all of you for making your time available for this and for your contributions that you will make here. And with that, I already hand over to the moderator of today's event, which is Abiba Yehu. She is the Executive Director of Global Rights and an outstanding leader in the society of Nigeria in her own right. So over to you, Abby, and thank you to you too.
Thank you so much, Yorchan, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited today. Good morning again, and I'm delighted to welcome you to what I consider one of the most important webinars you will attend this year, a webinar in commemoration of the EndSARS protests. Now, the EndSARS protests may have come to an end, but the movement is alive and well, awaiting an opportune time. EndSARS was and is a success, at least from where I stand. And where I stand, citizens won. They got tired of the status quo and they decided to do something real about their frustrations and oppression. They went troubleshooting and found the real root of Nigeria's governance challenge, which is impunity. Now, they called it what it is, distilled it, and demanded accountability. They reclaimed their country, they filled their space and their role as citizens, demanding accountability of public officers. The best part for me was that they mobilized themselves and were united in their common purpose. It didn't matter which ethnic group you came from, you were Nigerian first, and that was all that mattered. They displayed leadership at its finest. They led from the center, refusing conventional labels and protocols that marred group dynamics. It was so inspiring in their unity that the rest of the world had to pause and take note. It felt like Nigeria was on the cusp of its birth. Note that I say they, because the overwhelming majority of them were young Nigerians, who, by the way, are the largest age group in this country. About 70% of Nigerians are under the age of 35. Now, last week I listened as Dike Chukwumerije brought the idea that the true Nigeria had not yet been born, and suggested that we're in the pangs of reclaiming a state that has gone rogue on us and was not representative of the Nigerian spirit. It reminded us of how Naija we carry last, and how the can-do spirit continues to make us stand out once we make up our mind to just do it. Across the globe, Nigerians are known as being Nigerians. Our gregarious spirit, our never can die spirit remains. Now, in spite of the state of our poverty, we're home to some of the richest people on earth. In spite of our state continues to fail us, PHCN and all that holds us bound, we're still home to the third largest movie industry in the world. We produce world acclaimed music. We churn out 5 unicorn fintechs in a single year, and that's Nigeria. That even with the worst educational system, we continue to produce some of the finest minds. But how come then our state is so different from who we are? Now, for me, NSAS was a demand for the state that truly reflects the Nigerian spirit. It was a recognition that we must ever be birthed, we must take the reins and occupy the office of the citizen. Occupying the office of the citizen is exactly what we did. And whether on the streets, on Twitter, in financial contributions to the movement, or just in the spirit of Naija, applauding as we sought for a state that is truly, truly define us as Nigerians. Now, the NSAS protests, like Wolfman said, were not perfect, and there was a lot we could have done better. Not just young people out on the street, the entire lot of us and the international community that watched as things spiraled. Now, today's meeting and the activities that will follow in the next 7 days, leading to the memorial of the tragic infiltration and attacks by government agencies, will provide us with an opportunity to reflect, to celebrate the wins, to learn from the mistakes, to be energized by the glimpse of ourselves as Naija that we will catch in the mirrors of these reflections and reclaim our civic space. We will be reminded that it's going to take more than banning Twitter, gagging the media, or throwing security forces out to quash the Naija spirit or the swag of these beautiful ones who have finally been born and will birth their own country. I invite you to join me in this journey of perspectives with our very brilliant panelists, Chioma Indikato, Amzat Lawal, and Mark Amaza. Good morning again and welcome. And we will go straight in, and I'm going to welcome first Chioma, who's going to provide perspective on how feminist voices amplified the NSAS movement and will be the voices that would lead in the chain towards advancing change in our polity as Nigeria. Chioma, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that really robust intro.
Hello, Chioma. We might have lost Chioma for a bit. So while our network gets patched back, perhaps Indy, would you like to go first then?
My network went off for a bit. I just joined back. I would like to hear what it is.
Okay, well, so yeah. So then let's move very quickly to you, Indy, while we try to get Chioma back. And I would like for you to provide perspectives on creating and maintaining spaces for young activists and women in the movement.
So, thank you for having me. And primarily, I would say, especially with reference to some work that we've actually done with Heinrich Böll, is the need to platform.
Oh no. So we lost Indy as well, but Chioma seems to be back. Chioma, would you like to give it another go?
Yes, I could try. And
Great.
fingers crossed the connection holds up this time. Could you repeat the question?
Let's be hopeful. Yeah, so I was asking if you could provide perspective on how women led from the center during the NSARS movement, and how you think that this might be the means for advancing women's rights and also development in our country as a whole, in leading movements moving forward in Nigeria.
Thank you. That's a big question. And I think it's really important that we're actually having these discussions, because oftentimes what you see is when it comes to movements and when it comes to struggles, women often are at the forefront of it. We saw this, all the way from Enough is Enough Nigeria from 2009 to Bring Back Our Girls, to pretty much a lot of the movements that have, that have come up. We have state of emergency from last year as well. But when it actually comes to leadership, then you start to hear the questions or the conversations about women can't lead, women should be at the background, women should be at home, and etc. What I really liked about the NSARS movement as far as women's leadership was concerned were a few things. The first of them was proactive accountability. And we saw this day in, day out from the ladies of the Feminist Coalition, putting out statements of how much had been raised, communicating how much was needed, and all of those things was really, really beautiful to see. I also think that the innovation and agility in managing not just the funds, but the challenges that got thrown up during the during the time of the protest was another thing that I think is not just instructive for us young people, but something that our leadership should start to think about. Because as challenges continued coming up, for instance, when accounts started getting blocked and frozen, the immediate move, the deployment of technology, the switch to crypto, right, and other forms of e-payments, as it were, kind of showed that this was a group not only in tune with the times, but a group willing to think really deeply and really quickly and to think on their feet. Something else that I think is very peculiar about women leading is collaboration. And the fact that everyone was welcome, no one was trying to hog the limelight, no one was trying to hog whatever popularity was there, and people were just willing to do the work, to build networks, to build bridges across the country, regardless of religion, ethnicity, whatever it was, to ensure that the ones who went out every single day went out safely and came back safely. And where that wasn't the case, it was to rally resources, rally people, rally networks, including even our parents, to ensure that people were able to get back home and to their loved ones safely. So I think there's a lot of instructive lessons for young people, but also for the government as we look back on the NSARS protest, but also as we look back at the place of women's leadership during the movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chioma. Short and to the point. And I have a number of questions, but I think that to allow the other panelists an opportunity to pitch, and then we'll take the questions together. But then I think it was very interesting that you had pointed out that women have led the movements, but the more recent movements in Nigeria, but it's very interesting in the country's history that the iconic movements across time were all led by women, whether you think of the Aba Women's Revolt, the Egba Women's Revolt, the Colas strikes, even the Enough is Enough movement, the Ali Must Go movement, that at the cusp of them all were always women, and they were the rallying forces, and that we must rewrite history and write them the right way as these things unfolded, and how women are able to rally these forces together has always been amazing. So thanks a lot, Chioma. And I'm going to ask Indy if she's able now to come back to talk to us again about how young people and women, continuing from where Chioma stopped, our women and young people are also able to be the ones that will herald the change that we are looking for as Nigerians.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I have better internet now. I was trying to start on a point last time on platforming, on the need to, and so if we're going straight to the how, sorry if my name is showing something different than Cindy Carter. So if we're going straight to the how, one of the things we did earlier in the year was a conference strictly for women on, activism, shrinking of the civic space. And I realized that even in these conversations around NSAS, as we've all spoken about how young women led these movements, or were front and center and doing things during these movements, I still noticed a conspicuous absence of young women in a lot of programs that are being set up for remembrance. In fact, I saw one program being set up for NSAS 1 year remembrance, and it was the Oni of Ife. That was going forward. I would say we need to do a lot of deliberateness.
Hello, Indy. Hi, Indy, are you still there? So it seems like we lost Indy again. When she comes back, perhaps we'll just have her turn our video off so that it's not as disruptive. We will come back to Indy, but I think we should quickly go to Mark because we don't have a lot of time. Mark, you've done a lot of public policy work. You have been very, very vested in ensuring that young people are in politics, are in public space, and that they're occupying properly and directly. Now, there's been a lot of complaints about young people in Nigeria. There's the idea that they're not interested in politics, that they're more for the entertainment in the public space than anything else. But you know the young people in Nigeria better. What's your assessment of young people, and how can we get more of them out there? We caught a glimpse of them in the protest last year, but how do we get them to occupy the space that truly belongs to them?
Thank you, Abby, for that question. So one thing we saw when people say young people are not interested in politics, there are different ways to slice that comment. To an extent, the young people are involved in politics, but the quality of involvement is usually the question. So a lot of times you see young people being involved in campaigns, and whether in the positive or the negative aspect, whether in campaigning for candidates or in negatively in being for election political thuggery. However, there's a strata of young people in Nigeria who are quite divorced from what's happening in the political space, especially those who believe they can, they don't depend on government for their sustenance. So there's this lack of interest in what's going on, and oftentimes what grabs their attention are the things that are the sensational stuff. One thing that we saw during the NSAS protests were as much as it was organic and it was leaderless and it was very people driven, there's also a lot of talk, a lot of young people who didn't even, or who had started looking for information around who do we talk to, who do we get to effect changes in laws, who are our legislators, what kind of reforms we put in place. Most times, when it comes to political office holders, everyone knows who the president is, and maybe at best your governors and maybe a few people like the Senate President, House of Reps, House Speaker. But when it comes to know, okay, who is the legislator? There's a gulf in information there, and that affects how we engage with political processes. Because if you're not informed, you cannot you cannot fully be an active citizen. If you do not know processes around how laws are made or changed, you won't even know where to apply pressure to have things change. So that's that gulf in civic education is something that has been there and still continues to be there, and that we need to bridge hugely for young people to be more involved. So during the EndSARS process, for example, we saw a lot of youth initiatives, online, offline. For example, the site which asks people to sign up so that once voter registration started, they could get alerted. And it was also a huge interest. I know people who were previously never interested in politics or in governance, suddenly taking interest and saying, okay, how can we make things change? What can we do? How do we go about this or that? We need to go out and vote. We need to register as voters and vote when elections come, and so on and so forth. It's not at the same momentum as it was during the protests, but there's that uptick in interest from young people and from citizens. So it's how do we sustain that interest? And that's where youth leaders or organizations and so on and so forth come into place. So for example, during exactly a year ago, like 14th October 2020, we had the NEC, National Economic Council, announced that they had decided that all states should set up judicial panels of inquiry to look into the victims, to find justice for victims of police brutality in their states. And since then, a lot of people there's been not much tracking of that. Just to illustrate how the momentum was lost between the protests and the work that needed to be done after the protests. So for example, in Lagos, there was one person who on Twitter kept live tweeting and putting out information on what happened in Lagos protests. Organizations like Yaga Africa and Enough is Enough have been tracking these panels across the country and putting out updates, but there hasn't been much engagement with it because it's a little more work than the protests. But in the end, while protests are very, very important, that work is what will put rubber to the road, will really apply that needed pressure and the finishing to get the changes we need. So I think it's just a lot of work in our smaller and larger spaces. We need to engage more young people and get to be more interested, to go beyond just the fluffy headlines, the tweets and the Facebook posts, but really take an interest in knowing what are the nitty-gritties of things that happen in the governance space. As elections approach, who is running for which office in your locality? Do you know the offices that people are running for? Do you know who are running for who is running for it? Do not just vote for just those are the top of the ticket and then think the work is done. Things like that. That's where a lot of work needs to be done moving forward.
Abby, are you still with us?
Hi, Mark. Oh, I'm sorry. I think my internet faded for a bit. I missed the tail end of what you said, Mark, but I had all kinds of questions running through my head as you spoke. One of the most important questions for me is, are we talking about just all young Nigerians? Should we focus on a certain class of young Nigerians? How do we unite young people in that quest of occupying their space? How do we even help them see that they own this country? But if you hold that thought and just think about that, and how do we educate a mass of people in a very short time, realizing also that a good proportion of our youth population did not have access to education or do not have access to quality education. And let's go to Amzat now before we come back to Indy, and also deal with the troublesome problem of how do we ensure that we keep our civic space open. You've been a part of a lot of movements and protests in Nigeria, Amzat, and a lot of them with a lot of young people. How do we keep young people vested in that space, even in occupying the physical spaces, the virtual spaces, the intellectual spaces? How do we ensure that we keep the civic space open in Nigeria? Thank you, Amzat.
My sister Abby, thank you so much. And maybe just use this opportunity to say happy birthday, Nikato. We're in a very critical time where government now deploys both legal and regulatory measures to restrict and clamp down on the civic space. I think before now, a lot of citizens don't understand or didn't understand our advocacy and most of our campaigns and protests around the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression and the rights of citizens. And there's a clear motivation that, or rather there's a clear motive that, the shutdown of voices of dissent, not minding the adverse effect it has on our democracy and development in the country in general. And how can we protect the civic space from, complete annihilation from government and their cronies? I think first, maybe we should start to develop or reinforce legal framework that ensures the right of activists, journalists, and independent media are protected. And there's a lesson here, because first they would target the activists, and a lot of people would say, oh, it's the activists, it's the civil society people, it's their business. But then they now transition and they targeted and dedicated journalists and media houses that they tag opposition voices. So I think that we need to form a solidarity around activists, campaigners, civil society, the journalists in the media houses, particularly the independent media houses, to protect and continue to fight for our civic space. Again, we need to improve and strengthen our legal and regulatory frameworks that allow citizens and civil society organizations to form and operate. I say this because these politicians, and sometimes the mistake we get is, or the mistake we embrace is the fact that, oh, they're not smart, oh, they're not educated. Come on, these are people that get people, really smart people, to not only work for them, but convince others, and have successfully led campaigns and elections and have occupied public office. So make no mistake, these people are smart and they're deliberate. And I think that we need to become more deliberate in our approaches, where we don't allow any loophole on the rule of law or on our constitution. Because if these people have their way, they would literally take our constitution and put it in the dustbin and say that, oh, for us to enjoy democracy, things has to be done this way. Why is it that it's only one party that will decide how things are done? I think we also need to broker and strengthen relationship across board, across various coalitions and alliances, civil society partners. And when I say civil society and partners, everyone has a role to play, because it might come to a point, like we've seen in Sudan, where as a civil society, your liberty and rights have been stripped away from you, that you only have to now wait for partners and friends across the border to help amplify that advocacy. I hope we don't get to that in Nigeria, but when you look at data and all of these indices, we're getting to a point where probably we will now wait for our colleagues in Nairobi or our colleagues in South Africa to help amplify our plight. So I think most importantly, we need to also recognize diversity and inclusivity. And the NSAS movement, there's a lot to learn from that movement in terms of inclusivity and diversity. and let's use this to develop some of the commitments and responses that we need to form this community that looks at this community that I would call solidarity community to advance our civic space and the priorities we want, because our civic space is rapidly shrinking, and it should be a cause for concern, and we should be scared, because one thing that we have learned from the NSAS is they can go to the extra mile. They can do anything. And because they're desperate and they've now understood that young people are understanding their rights, their liberty, and they're now exercising that right and mobilizing and organizing even better, leveraging social media. So we might come closer to election time and probably they would literally shut down the internet. So what would we do? So again, it's for us to critically look at what could be the worst case scenario and how do we address this scenario, because there's a lot of scenario playing out and 2023 is just around the corner. And NSAS 1 year, there's been reflection and there's a lot we can learn from it and how we can organize and engage better, but we must stand in solidarity.
Thanks, Hamzat. So we must stand in solidarity, and I will just start. I'll come back to you. I think I see Indy back in the room, and I don't want to lose the opportunity for us to listen to her. Indy, I'm going to ask that you please keep your camera off, and
yes,
we'll
please.
just listen. Yes, so we'll just listen. And I think that this is probably the right time for you to come in, because Hamzat has said very important things about young people and about the need to be very inclusive, the need to build solidarity within the space, the need to not overly define activists as just people who work for civil society organizations or people who bear the label activists, but to ensure that we're all part of the movement in saving Nigeria. And also the fact that we should push for legislation to protect activists, to protect the rights of people in the civic space. But the Constitution does that, doesn't it? And that it is even harder for women and young people to occupy the civic space in Nigeria, apart from protests. What are your thoughts on ensuring that women and young people are able to occupy the space more effectively?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Very clearly, you sound great. And by the way, happy birthday, Dee.
Thank you, and thank you to Hamza too for that. Thank you so much. Okay, so inclusivity, across board in terms of everything that we're trying to do, one of the major things I always talk about, even when it comes to politics, is that whatever you're doing, if you've not gotten the emotional investment of people, then it's almost like you're wasting your time, right? People should be willing to put a lot on the table, if not everything on the table for a thing. And that's what we saw with NSAS. That was the success of NSAS. And I got a little bit of what Mark was saying before my internet went off too. And what I heard, again, is at this point, that emotional investment is off. For me, of course, something died, and I'm sure with many other young people, something died on the 20th of October, 2020. But how do we get back to that place? How do we ensure that people are emotionally invested? And if you look at the thing with NSAS, the thing with the nature of the protest is that once we stated that there was no leader, right? There was no, for lack of a better word, career activists. And this is not me being judgmental. It is that many young people, especially Gen Z, people who are just coming up, feel like, oh, these are the ones that when they talk, when they get on the table, they're not one of us. They've become a certain group of people. But NSAS saying there's no leader to this, is just everybody, made everyone feel a sense of ownership. And I think that is a major thing we need to go for when we're looking for inclusivity, giving a sense of ownership to this space for young people, making young people feel seen, making young people feel heard, irrespective of whether they have grown through the ranks or how long their organizations have stayed, or even if they have one at all. A lot of the things I've noticed, especially with young girls, is that once you give them that access, I start talking with young girls and I make myself very accessible. We're speaking the same language. We have the same issues. We have, just always talk to them. Oh, you want to give them a platform. My organization is doing this thing. Come and speak. Come and it starts from there. And if we actually look at our own careers as civil society people who have, those of us who have been, or those who have been here for quite a while, you realize that, gradually it started from one person giving you a chance and then, or give you an opportunity, and you took advantage of that opportunity. And I want us to spread this opportunity. This platforming is very key. It's very key. We can talk about people coming in and doing, but if we do not take it upon ourselves that, look, we're going to spread this thing, open up the silos, open up this, not clique, but you get what I'm saying with respect to how tight-knit civil society can be. And we need to let this new generation come in. That is for young people. We need to ensure that, look, more of them are being heard. It's that being heard. It's that thing. Once a person starts to feel like they're a part of something, they will keep doing more and more to help that place be better. By doing something for themselves, they're doing something for this space. And that is what I want to see more of. If we platform new voices, you'll be shocked as well. I mean, many of us were shocked by the caliber of conversation, the quality of conversations young people were able to have during the NSAS protests. And we need to build on that. In terms of women too, it's the same thing. It's back and forth with the same thing. I was pointing out before the internet dealt with me that I noticed that in a lot of the NSAS conversations going forward, that the representation of women in the conversations is very low. And I reached out to ask. I said, why this? Where are the women? Women were integral in the protest. Where are women voices now? We're seeing politicians being called upon to be part of NSAS conversations. We're seeing the Oni of Ife being called upon. But why aren't we platforming women? Of course, they reached out to a lot of the young women. They did not want to come out to speak and all of that. So I submitted names again. I said, there's Choma Agwebo, there's Buki Williams. I called names, sent names. Okay, look for them and speak with them. But we need to keep expanding too. We need to ensure that there are more young women in these spaces. The more you populate, the more you wouldn't have excuses to say that, we don't have this. And in the political space, I heard Hamza speak about the political space, and it was a very brilliant submission. This emotional investment thing too needs to go there. We're talking about the 2023 elections, and still, we've built a lot of work has gone into Not Too Young to Run. And I feel, in the past couple of years, I expected that young people would have done so much, but it's the suffering. It has kept us busy. I have been busy trying to survive. Every day I've been busy trying to activist one thing or the other. I'm pretty sure if I just go on Twitter again today, you would see one injustice that has happened, either by government, security forces, anything, and then you have to keep on that. And that has been what has been happening. For the past couple of years, instead of building on the gains of work that has been done by civil society, we've been fighting to survive. But now we have to do everything concurrently. I've realized that none of the suffering, none of these things are going to really stop for us to say, okay, it has finished. We need to get back to the politics. No, we can't just leave just Yaga and, connected development. And then the few organizations that are doing a lot. Look at how much fight had to go into electoral reforms and the victory going on there. We have to spread across these places and into political parties. I know this is not supposed to be a political conversation, but we really need to. And we're seeing that post October 20th, 2020, young people have actually given up. And something died in that increase in political participation. And we need to get back to fighting for that. Part of the things we need to fight for with respect to inclusivity is for youth wings in political parties. We need to fight for youth wings. We need to fight for women wings. We need to fight for spaces where young people within these places have some level of power. We need to fight for opening up of political parties for the 70%. That is what we have said here today. 70% of the population is a certain group of people. If 70% of the population is a certain group of people, it means that whether we like it or not, these are the highest number of voters. And if these are the highest number of voters, we can't have them feeling like, look, they don't feel like political participation, they don't care about this space, but then we're trying to solve things via this space because you will still meet politics. So my last point on this is, look, on the political end of things, we need to look into political parties. Whether we like it or not, there are political parties. I think now the highest I think we have is 18. These are the political parties. And within political participation, there are a group of political parties that are more popular or more saturated or have more reach than others. And we have to look into how, whether or not they like it. Notice that with the National Assembly, once civil society started putting pressure, we started seeing a lot of results. If we put this same pressure in political parties, they will cave. And these are the places where we can actually put in a lot of young people. If we put the same pressure there, they will cave in and they will open up. So I'm going to plead this, that as we're going forward, as we're looking at strategies, CSO, civil society, we need to come back and look at the political parties, because at the end of the day, these are the places that produce what we see in the National Assembly, that produce people in the executive arm of government. And if we are not looking at this, at the end of the day, we just wait for them to get to the National Assembly, it keeps making our work more and more difficult. So going forward, how do we ensure that young people have a sense of ownership, but not just a sense of ownership, own these political parties? Thank you.
Thank you, and brilliant as always, indeed. How do we ensure that young people own the political parties, especially when they're 70% of our population? More importantly, how do we get them emotionally vested in Project Nigeria? I would say that we saw that emotional investment last year. And I beg to differ, India. I don't think it died. I think right after the protests were quashed, you found everywhere, and I'm sure many young people turned to you and said, what can we do now? What should we do now? We want to do something, even if it's not protests. And I think that seed may have died, but it's time to water it and help it to grow back. So I'm just going to quickly circle back. I'm coming back indeed with a question. I have a big question for you, but I'm just going to quickly circle back to Chioma and start from a subject that's very dear to our hearts: women and technology and movements. Chioma, Nigeria banned Twitter, and a lot of people thought it was just about insulting, that the president felt insulted. I feel it's more. I feel it's because of NSARS, and that they will not, and they were afraid of the first anniversary of NSARS, along with everything that was going on in that space. And they just decided, so after the first anniversary of NSARS, and mark my word, so after the first anniversary of NSARS, they were not going to open up that space. But it points to the opportunities in technology. And you also touched on it. You spoke about how women during NSARS leveraged fintech, were able to go into cryptocurrencies when they started to freeze accounts and things like that. And women were at the cusp of that. What are the opportunities for women to occupy the civic space in Nigeria, and also the political space in Nigeria through technology? Chioma?
Thank you very much for that question. So this is a very interesting question, because Twitter was banned in June of June of this year, sorry. The NSARS movement was October last year. A few interesting things. The first of them is we claim to be a country that follows due process. I'm sure that everyone now agrees that we are only a country that follows due process when it profits or benefits the person for whom due process needs to be upheld. Because when it doesn't profit the people in power for due process to be upheld, then it's thrown out the window, and then all sorts of silly excuses are given. But if you look at the banning of Twitter, I think it's very important to continue to understate the fact that the same thing that was done to Mr. President, which was, deleting a tweet which he put out, which contravened Twitter's policies, is the same thing that had been done to, former President Trump, right? It's the same thing that had been done to other leaders and other people, with politically exposed people who had contravened Twitter's laws. And so it's like a petulant child, you are told you can't do something, and so you decide to destroy everything, regardless of the effects it will have on regular citizens, regardless of the fact that Nigeria now houses the world's largest group of extremely poor people, regardless of the fact that hundreds of thousands of young Nigerians are making money, legitimate money, using digital platforms, including Twitter. Regardless of the fact that last year, I remember joining a Twitter space where the president of El Salvador was talking about, he was just going to go into parliament for their parliament to debate on El Salvador adopting cryptocurrencies as one of their national, currencies. this conversation held on Twitter. This space held on Twitter, and people had these conversations, right? And while we were in that space, he took a little break, went into parliament. Their parliament, voted favorably for the country to adopt, Bitcoin as one of their legal currencies. And they came back to us in the Twitter space. It was like we were physically wherever we were, but we were joining El Salvador in such a historic moment. And I remember writing on LinkedIn that morning saying, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm listening to the president of El Salvador talk to us on Twitter spaces about what his country wants to do. And I'm in a country where Twitter is banned, where my own president has banned Twitter, and we're all having to use VPN, regardless of the cost, regardless of the exclusion for people who are trying to use the internet. And when you then think about almost like how many months after, and all of the back and forth that's been going on with Twitter and all these organizations, it's almost become, and for people with insider information, you'll see that it's become a thing of pride and a thing of shame as well, because how do we backtrack from this ban? Because what we were expecting Twitter to do, they're clearly not going to do, because not everybody operates in the haphazard manner that Nigeria likes to operate in. And so it's like, instead of us to say, we probably didn't get this one right, everyone is just, talking from two sides of the mouth. People are saying all sorts of things, nothing relevant, nothing helpful, which is a bit of a shame. I think the other reason why you can draw like a straight line from EndSARS to the ban of Twitter, but also to the increased shrinkage of civic spaces, is that everything that they saw, everything that the world saw, was organized online. Everybody saw, and the EndSARS movement was planned online. As a matter of fact, a lot of credence is given, and a lot of credence is given to the Lagos, Abuja, and other cities. But this actually started in Warri, it started in Delta State, right? And it was, how did we all hear about it? Again, social media. And so we must continually see social media as a tool for great change, as a tool for exponential, I'm looking for a word that just means like, I think explosive, as a tool for explosive change. But because if you go back to 2009 and the Arab Spring, again, it started from one person saying, you know what, enough is enough. And then that smidgen of activity was captured, posted online, and so many other people jumped on it. In the same way, I want to lean on what the other speakers have spoken about young people. I think you even alluded to it as well, Abiodun, about young people picking back up from wherever it is that we feel like we left off. I feel like a lot of people are still dealing with the trauma of EndSARS. I remember that coming into this month, October, I just felt like, oh my God, this is the month where all of these things happened, right? Just like a year ago. So I still think there's considerable trauma. I'm praying and wishing, healing and just like a lot of light and love for people who participated in the protest, for people who are still missing, because whether we like it or not, there's still a number of people who have not been traced by their families. I remember being with Buki Williams, who Indy mentioned, and we were at the protest in Abuja, and there was a young man who passed out. And so, there was an ambulance, and so they revived him, etc. And I was asking him, where is your family? Because one of the things I ended up doing was talking to young people and figuring out, okay, if something happens to you, how do we keep track of everybody? And I asked him, where's your family? And he said his family was in Lagos. And I said, so why are you protesting here? And he was like, oh, he didn't feel very free. So he entered a night bus from Lagos and came to Abuja to protest with nowhere to sleep, nowhere to eat, nothing. He just said he wanted to protest in a different city. And I remember saying to Buki, if this boy had been killed, his family wouldn't know where he is, because left to them, he's in Lagos. And I guess this is the story I always, give back to politicians when they start saying, where are the bodies? A lot of people didn't protest in their home states. I remember even having to hide the fact that I was out on the streets from my parents, because, they had said, don't go, we hear it's going to get violent, etc. But my spirit couldn't stay at home. So for me, there's like, and I think, I don't know if it's a shameless plug or anything, but one of the things TechHat did last year was we hosted an event immediately after the protest. And we did two things with that event, which we eventually turned into a policy brief. With the first of them was we x-rayed women's leadership of movements going back from 2009. We also x-rayed the evolution of technology, because we continue to, and I think Indy mentioned, we continue to exclude women when these stories are finally told, right? We continue to exclude the real players. And so for us, it was, how do we go back and tell these stories in such a way that if Labaja was there, we want to hear and see that Labaja's name is there, not somebody who then capitalizes on their already existing popularity to, as it were, make more of a name for themselves, excluding the actual people who did the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chioma. Yes, documentation is one of the ways in which we can leverage tech. Documentation is also one of the ways in which we can ensure that the narrative remains true to what exactly happened and not how some political figures want for us to remember it or think about it. Now, I'm going to quickly circle back to Mark, and I'm going to ask, also bridging from where Chioma stopped. Now, you will recall that the hashtag EndSARS was actually first used in 2017 by the Twitter handle Ms. Nkemjoy, and apparently had been created by at Bill's 2005, and since then it's taken a life and a verve of its own, and did not reach its full potential. It didn't reach a crescendo till 2020. Change takes time. Movements need curation and maturity. Mark, how do we get young people to learn to be patient in their impatience? How do we help people to be tenacious in movements?
That's a really good question. So I believe for that to happen, it will now go to turning the anger of protest into anger into organizing. Because if you do not organize, protests will, like I said earlier on, while protests are very, very important and very powerful, by themselves, they won't get us to the point we want to get to. So, for example, with EndSARS, the overall goal was police reform. To have protest continuously until that reform is effected is well, not say impossible, but was unlikely. So how do you then? So a good way to have done that would be how to organize around those issues, understanding the fact that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you have to be invested in the long haul. And not look for quick fixes and immediate solutions. That's why I also referenced earlier on, like, despite the fact that there's also been work around putting out the work, being a searchlight or spotlight on the panels of inquiry that states have set up, the states that set up, also even the states that refuse to set up, there doesn't be as much engagement, because for a lot of people, that in the moment of the protest was where it's tough for them. So now, and we see again, like Chioma said earlier on, like Hamza and Niditu said about how it's like a new generation of activists are coming up. Because I mean, I can speak for, at least I know all my co-panelists, we're all in our 30s, and many of us felt too old during the protest, in the sense that the people in their 20s and they're leading this protest and leading this movement, and that gives me hope, because it shows that baton will be passed down the line, and if the work is built upon it, all the things, the changes we want to see, and they organize properly, sustain that pressure, those changes can come into effect.
So in essence, that we begin to rechannel their energies. But the core of my question was, how do we help the sustaining power? And you said, let's move the movements beyond the streets into ensuring that the real work is done. If you want to end SARS, what you really want is police reform. How do we get police reform to happen? Yes, and so it takes a whole lot of dynamics to get that done. Eka Williams has a question, and I'm going to bridge Eka's question with another question of my own and send to Amzat. So Amzat, I hope you're set. Eka asks here, how are young people using movement building to counter ethnic and religious divisions? And I'm also reminded then by a statement Faye had made in one of his recent articles about how are religious organizations able to organize young people into moving and doing things, but then that when it comes to mainstream society, especially in governance, we're not able to do that. So how are we able to rebuild in a way that young people are able to counter ethnic and religious divide, and yet at the same time that we're able to use the very lessons that we have in how those are able to unite citizens to ensure that they're not divided. Amzat, in movements, that is. Are you there, Amzat?
Yes, I'm here. I think I have a small network glitch. Please, can you repeat the question?
Eka Williams had asked, how are young people using, or how can, I'm just going to rephrase a question, how can young people use movement building to counter ethnic and religious divisions? And I was also wondering, how can we get religious platforms to also be launch pads for uniting across-board citizens, young people, into occupying the civic space?
Oh, I think first I would respond by saying, what exactly does society want? Because I'm asking this question because when you, as a sociologist and a political scientist, when you look at society, particularly in this case, Nigeria, you just wonder, you beg that what exactly does society want? You know, watching Bibi Nigeria, following the NSAS campaign and protest. And you just wonder and you worry. And with upcoming elections in Anambra and 2023 elections, and the shrinking civic space and clamp down activists. See, you can't take away religion and ethnicity from the fabric of our being. Sadly, mischief makers and bad politicians have really used propaganda to embed religion, ethnicity negatively in our DNA. But what we can do, and I'm excited to witness what some religious leaders and scholars have done, and maybe even mention a few. So, for instance, when you look at Pastor Tunde Bakare, for instance, who is okay in having a Muslim come on the altar to have debate around election, around PVC and civic engagement and civic duty. Or when you look at Sheikh Lemu, who is countering terror, working around advocacy on counter-terrorism and messages, and sharing, key messages to imams on Friday prayer sermon. So we can't take away religion and ethnicity, but how can we also look at stakeholders in the religious corners and people around ethnicity corners, so there's the traditional leaders or rulers and religious leaders, and start working with them on key civic advocacy. Do you know that today, if the Sultan of Sokoto make a pronouncement, it is law. If the Oni of Ife makes a pronouncement, it is local law, because customarily they're custodians of history, but they're also custodians, of local tradition and even religious leaders. I think we need to start seeing them as allies and to start working around advocacy to get their followers, have them talk to their followers to start unlearning and relearning using a model probably that have worked before. We can build a new model because we need this kind of allies to help us stop the shrinking civic space, but also roll back, this shrinking civic space, because you can't take it away from them. But then again, when you look at society and the fabric that brings us together as society, again, I beg, what exactly does society want? Because we that were researchers were even confused right now to what exactly does society want and what kind of society we're building and what kind of future we're going to even go into or leave for our children and the future generation.
Thank you, Amzat. So what exactly do we want as Nigerians? Have we articulated the type of society we want? Do we have a vision board of the Nigeria of our dreams? And I'm sure those lovely triplets of yours, Hamzat, are making you think deeper about what Nigeria should want and should have. I have another question here, which says, or it feels like a rhetoric question, though. What are the options available to the youths when government quickly criminalizes protests or even introduces hoodlums to hijack legitimate demands of citizens or of the people? I'm going to throw that to you, Indy. Please still keep your camera off because I'm not very sure about what NCC is doing with your network.
Okay. Thank you so much. During the NSAS protest, I think that fell under us underestimating, right? Hamza did speak about underestimating politicians. And the major thing, of course, the Nigerian politician has when you are almost checkmating is violence. And we do not have the same propensity for violence. Unfortunately, some of the solutions I might profile. So I'll keep what I thought of doing around that time to myself. But also let's to the more sane options. I think expanding protests beyond the streets, because at some point I told myself that I do not want to keep meeting Nigerian governments with just my mortality. That is what I take to the streets with. I go out and I put my mortality out there, and the Nigerian government has shown time and time again that they have absolutely no issue with showing me how expendable that is. So the weapon I have is pretty, myself and my expendability. We can expand beyond that. I think we've mentioned tech here. There were so many things that we could have done with tech. And this is not to say that we didn't do well enough, but we could have expanded. It was just a lot coming at us at the same time. And I understand how we felt at that time, being neck deep or knee deep in it. I would say leveraging on technology. One thing we've shown the government, they tried shutting down Twitter and we went the other way. But also, what can we do with this same technology that we have? Do we still have an upper hand? We have some sort of hand, we have some sort of ability. And how do we organize around technology? How, again, do we organize around more things beyond taking to the streets? More people writing, more people entering into civil society. It still boils down to what it is we're saying. And also coming back to the fact, and Mark stated that it's not, NSAS is not an event. Ending government corruption is not an event. And I think we got really excited with that time to see it as, oh, this is the one thing that, we're going to get it now. It's not an event. It's not a sprint. It's a long, long journey. So our major means in countering the government and its violence and everything they would employ to stop us, for me, is everything we've said here today, which boils down to organizing better and realizing that this journey is long. It's really, really long. There were people who have been on it before we were born, and those people managed to see themselves in a democracy eventually. So we have come now and we're seeing things now. And if we strategize around short-term, medium-term, long-term, I think we would get it right. We're already getting it right little by little, but if you look at what has been able to be done, I keep pointing at the National Assembly, because I would remember several years ago, it wasn't like this, to actually put pressure on legislators. And I also remember with my work in politics, especially during the presidential campaign, where I served in the strategy team for one of the political parties, and you underestimate how many things politicians do not know, or the system does not know, unless you bring it to the table. And so we need to keep bringing these things to the table, knowing that we may not get it now, but if we decide, like people in Fix Elections NG and other people backing all that movement said, look, no, electronic voting. If we decide, and with enough pressure, it will happen. So if we treat this as something that, look, painstakingly and patiently, many of us, more of us, we can keep organizing around issues, one issue after the other, one issue after the other. I think eventually we'll get there. That protest of, like, protesting, taking to the streets, for me, after NSAS, I've just been like, what else? What else? What else? And so for me, for my what else is looking at this as a very long journey, picking up components that we know right now. Something needs to change around this right now to see something in Nigeria. Human rights being one of them for me. Something needs to change, and then building on all of these things. Elections, something needs to change. I'm building on all of this. Politics, something needs to change. I'm building on it. Knowing that, look, this is for the long haul. We saw young people during NSAS, and I remember going there and like, wow, these were in their early 20s. I'm finally in my 30s. This is a different generation. But also remembering that we too, we started in our early 20s. The time has passed. And look at what we have been able to do. If you look back from when many of us started, it's a lot of work. And that lot of work has been done by doing what? Every day, showing up and doing something. Every single day. When people are calling citations for some of us and the things we have done, in fact, everyone involved in this webinar, I look back like, wow, when did we do this? But we did it by showing up every day, showing up every day, showing up every day. And I think that's the way we need to look at this going forward. Showing up every day for the things that we want to see change. That in itself is protest. That in itself is action. And 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll look back, look, from every day something, bringing in more people, doing more things, strategizing, uniting more, we will see the change. So I think that, look, that day of violence, the day the government employed violence, they thought they won. But not really. I think that going forward, that resolve to keep pushing, even showing up the next day and not giving up is some form of victory, and we can keep at it. So keeping at it, showing up every day, doing these things that we're doing and doing it better is our resource, is our retort to the government's violence, and is our own victory. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed. That was brilliant. Dress up, show up every day. You need to show up every day for the things that you want to see change, and that we're in this for the long haul. It wasn't a sprint. It was bigger than a marathon, or it is bigger than a marathon. It's an entire movement. I'm going to give opportunity for 3 people to also share comments. So if you would like to, if you're in the audience and you'd like to share a comment, please press the raise hand button. But in the meantime, I'm going to read a comment from Auntie Lizzie Igbine of the Nigerian Women Agro-Allied Farmers Association. And she's always so passionate. And she says, good day all. I listened to the discussion that youths are not having leadership contributed to the crisis last year during NSAS. Do we have plans to organize youth and their leadership now? Also, I see a guest has also left a comment here to say, I agree with Mr. Amza that our religion and ethnicity has come to stay, but it's high time that we realize that these 2 items are the bane to our unity, growth, and development. There are other countries who are more religious than Nigeria, and they're more holy, united, and developed than we are. So why is religion different in our sphere? And that was from Omale Omachi Samuel. Yes. Okay. So while we wait for, does anyone have questions or would like to share their own perspective on this issue as we begin to think of rounding up? Okay, I see Udwak Abasi Akpabio. You can step to the plate and I'll unmute you. Udwak Abasi Akpabio.
Udwak, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Please unmute, Udwak. We've given you the permission to. Hi, Udwak. Udwaka Basia, Fabio, are you there? Well, if anyone else has something to say, you could go ahead and raise your hand. I see, Indy, your hand is up. I'm going to still give you an opportunity to speak. Udwak, please go on. And while I wait for Udwak, Victor Ajwa asks that how do we move forward as a movement to enable us negotiate better in the political space ahead of 2023? Any of the panelists should be free to answer that question. Udwak, are you ready? So let's just go ahead and answer the question. Please, how do we move forward as a movement to enable us negotiate better in the political space ahead of 2023? Hamzat, would you like to answer that?
Sure. What's the question again? How do we
move forward as a movement to enable us negotiate better in the political space ahead of the 2023 general elections?
I'm glad you said political space. And when Indikato was talking and she said her experience during the presidential campaign, I was actually smiling. I think that we need to do away with the norm or with the perception that politics is dirty and we really cannot play politics. If that's the mindset we had, the Not Too Young to Run Act would not be history and be law today. So I think it's activists and advocates, civil society, and taking lessons from what were the gaps pre-democracy and post-democracy, the people who led the protests around against the military junta, one gap, and I've been speaking to a lot of them, one gap that they had experienced was the fact that they didn't transition into politics and they relinquished politics to the military people who removed khaki and wear Barbaric guns, some politicians, and today we are where we are. So I think that one key lesson and going into 2023 is we need to start actively participating in politics, yes, mainstream politics. And we would not lose ourselves if we have, if we build, that collective, what I call that collective belief of what the vision that we want to see. We would not lose ourselves to the political intrigue, but we must play politics because you're trying to negotiate power and you think that it will just be given to you. So a lot of people are benefiting from the status quo. And what we're trying to do is break that status quo and break those barriers. So we must embrace the Nigeria fabric of politics and bring in new dimension and new innovation that is not about personal interest, but collective interest and service delivery. So my sister, let us play that mainstream politics.
Let us play that mainstream politics. But I think the emphasis, Amzad, was actually on as a movement, as young people. But you say that we can't just stay on our side of the fence. We've got to scale over and take it from the center. I hear you. Now, Jamil Falarian also asked a question here saying, in what ways can we best manage information during protests? Shoma, this sounds like something you do. Would you like to respond? Could you turn your camera off? It's a little difficult to hear you. Shoma, could you please turn your camera off? Okay, I think it's not quite working with Shoma. Mark, would you like to answer that question? How best can we manage information during protests?
So this is a bit of a tough question. I think as much as possible, it would just be to make sure we put out accurate information, timely and accurate information. And this is important because during protests, passions are up, and it's a temptation to put out information that is misleading or inaccurate in order to get people going. I know, like with reference to the answers protest, for example, there was a lot of fact checking too by people that are involved in the protest. So when things are put that are not accurate, there are people who almost immediately will counter and say, no, this is not what happened, that is not what happened. Managing information is a tricky thing in our world today because of how fast information moves, citizen journalists and all that. So the best is just to do as much as possible, put out timely information, accurate information in a timely manner, and also to fact check other information people put out, no matter how much it taps into our emotions or gets us fled up. It should not just fall into temptation of acting on any information, any and every information we see, or spreading it forward.
Thanks, Mark. Choma is back. Choma, would you like to weigh in as well?
Yes, sorry. I'm sorry about that. I was talking about, the almost as it were sponsored disinformation campaigns that were put out by various parties. Some say including government during the protest to just undermine the process. The protest, but also to just introduce on what Mark just said about, on the internet today in 2021. If you're not able to sift through information to figure out what's real and what's potentially fake, then you're not doing yourself the greatest service possible. So I guess also how to manage information flow during a protest is to fact check stuff, right? When somebody tells you, if 2011, I think, was the first time I ever monitored the elections in Nigeria virtually, because I wasn't living in Nigeria at the time. And one of the things we noticed was we would see someone, for instance, say, oh, a ballot box in, let's say, Anambra State has just been snatched, blah, 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 blah. And if you look at the person's location on their Twitter, they're in America, or they're in India, or they're in Dubai. And so we started challenging them to say, why are you tweeting this with so much, assuredness? Why are you tweeting this with so much confidence? You're not even in the country. And then you hear things like, oh, we saw it on a WhatsApp group. Layer of figuring out what might be fake or what might be true is for people themselves to be discerning, right? So when you see something, if it sounds fantastic, a lot of times it is fantastic and it's not true, right? If you, and I think another thing about social media is that over time, a society self-corrects. So there are a number of people now that if they tweet good morning, to be honest, I go outside to check the sun, I check a wristwatch, maybe I even go online to check the time. That's because over time, they have made themselves out to be the people who don't tell the truth, the people who are sensationalist in nature. If you even look at traditional media today, or the publishers who share their work online, there are certain platforms or outlets that you see news from that you don't bother talking about till you see other established or more credible organizations, media organizations, talking about the same thing. So I'd like to advise or just encourage people to use themselves as a first layer to sift through the information that they receive, especially before they share it. I'm not even saying for your own consumption. Before you even consume the information, confirm that it is true, confirm that there is more than one source for it, confirm that those sources are credible and have been, sharing credible information in the past. But then also to the media and to people, again, with social media and the internet, everyone's now, as in quote, a citizen's journalist. Everyone is now, a purveyor of their own news. When you make a mistake, apologize, put out the correct information, not only so you don't destroy your own credibility, but just so you don't mislead people. Because whether we like it or not, if you take the 20th of October, 2020, for instance, I had seen on social media, people were saying that if they continued tweeting and tagging the United Nations, after 30 days, the United Nations would come to Nigeria to save them. Now, at the time I was doing a bit of work for one of the UN agencies. And I mean, even without doing that work, I knew it wasn't true. So I remember telling a few of my friends, look, we need to put out this information. The UN is not coming to save anybody. I don't even know what that means. Later that afternoon, we then saw people saying that after the curfew in Lagos had been announced, we saw people tweeting and putting on Facebook and on WhatsApp that if they waved the flags, the military wouldn't shoot because the military respect the flags or something like that. And immediately, just to be absolutely sure, I rang a a retired Major General friend of mine, and I said, is this true? And he was like, what does that mean? It's rubbish. So again, I came back on social media and I started tweeting, waving the flags won't save you. And I put it on my Facebook, I put it on my Twitter, I put it on my WhatsApp, I put it everywhere. And I under that thread, a few people were asking me, is it true? You know, do people actually believe this? And I'm like, to be honest, people believe it. And that's why it broke my heart. And I remember just bawling my eyes out that night when young people who were lucky were saying we were waving the flags, but they kept on shooting. And so for me, it was like, sometimes this misinformation and these bits of disinformation, they actually have real life consequences, because a lot of people at Lekki felt like if they waved the flags, if you listen to people who were there that day, they would tell you they were waving the flags, they were singing the national anthem, they didn't think the military would shoot. So I think that, you know, the thing about receiving information and acting on it is a lot of times there are real life and death implications. So sifting through the information very carefully with all the discernment possible, it's not just about yourself. It's not just about the information you're consuming, but it's like super, super important for the next person, because whether we like it or not, like the panelists, people on this call, there's some measure of exposure, there's some measure of an education. That's not the case for everybody out there. It's not. And so we must see ourselves, you know, we're like with traditional media, you have the traditional gatekeepers, but with social media, we all have the responsibility to be gatekeepers. And I think it's why I'm very unforgiving of people who know and then intentionally put out disinformation, because you're almost a murderer in my books, because these things have real life, very, very real life implications. Thank you. Sorry if I got too passionate there. It's just, yeah.
No, you were perfect, Chioma. Perfect, and your intervention was just exactly what we needed. The flag during the protest was I think a very, very brilliant example of what could have gone wrong with disinformation, and also the fact that we realized that there was the deliberate injection of disinformation in the space to curb real life information, and we still need to think soundly about that, and the fact that after a while, those who put out disinformation and misinformation out there will gain their notoriety for that. Peter Ochelebe asked a question. He says, or a comment, good day all, Peter here. Can we think around involving religious bodies in ensuring youth also take ownership of the state of the nation, commit to getting involved in creating change through participation in politics, civil society drives, and also joining protests through lending their voices, through physically being present or writing opinions and think pieces. The reach of the religious space is enormous and will create a ripple effect if advocacy is also targeted at religious bodies and their leaders. I think we saw a bit of that during the NSAS movement. There were a lot of prayer walks around the country, which was a way of their own types of protests. Joseph, let's see. So Joseph also asks, Joseph Philip also says that the hoodlums used to perpetrate violence by the political class are youths, and those that led the protests are youths, and at the end, the youths were those that suffer the consequences the most. How do we bridge the divide between the so-called hoodlums and the learned youth involved in the protest towards advancing the cause of the Nigerian youth in the political space? Ooh, that's the heavy development question. That sounds like a question for Mark. So Victor Adjoa again says, I will suggest movements that could transform into a viable political party or merge with parties that share the same ideologies. So Mark, would you like to answer the question of helping the twain to meet between the socioeconomic divide, I think, is the largest part of the issue of between the youths that were used to infiltrate the movements, or rather to disrupt the movement, and the youth that organized the NSAS protest. Mark?
All right, I think let's start off with countering the assumption that all youth will think alike or act alike, because by virtue of being the same age range. That's an assumption that is fallacious and it won't happen. So for many of the young youths that were used to disrupt the protests, I see them also as victims of bad governance, victims of a system that's abused and continues to abuse them, such that they are not able to differentiate between to make the right decisions and to be able to even turn down the offers being given, because for some of them, they were induced financially, some were used, ethnic and religious sentiments were used to motivate them. They have been basically being used. To bridge the divide, I think it's as much as possible that engagement, and in the end is for those of us who are organizing around these governance issues, is to continue to push in that direction, because with good governance, it will solve that problem, or take care of that problem where they are continually being used in such a manner, where they are victims of a system of bad governance decisions that makes them vulnerable to being used by whether it's politicians or whoever it is that wants to use them for their own selfish interest. That has to, and as much as possible, is to engage across those lines. It might not always come out the result we want, and it might be a goal of understanding in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But most importantly is to ensure that we enthrone this good governance we want. Because for many of them, for example, they are also victims of bad policing. But at that point, they're not seeing it, because at that point, they're looking at, okay, this is the money I've been given, and this is my daily bread or whatever it is right now before me. And that's what I can see. You know, they don't have, so I would call it luxury of able to say, okay, this is being done for our own good. So for us, is a challenge that ensure that governance issue we are fighting for, or we are fighting to solve, we should push and solve it so that it will, because it will benefit all of us, everyone. It is a rising tide that will lift all boats.
Very apt thoughts, Mark, that we will not always think the same. The young people in any country across the world do not all think in the same direction. And also that the socioeconomic divide, poor governance, has ensured that a lot of young people are disadvantaged. We're one of the poorest countries in the world, and that people are struggling on a daily basis to put food on their table, and they're very disillusioned and will do anything for the dollar. That those who have nothing to lose will help everyone lose everything. So we have more comments here, basically someone saying, well done to all the panelists, and reminding us that we cannot walk in silos. And so moving forward, we should be intentional and all-compassing. However, we must have a way of knowing the moles in our midst. I think it goes back to the issue of people not having the same agendas in movements, and that's something that we really need to think about very carefully. I will then end by asking each of the panelists to make their final statements as we begin to bring today's meeting to a close. So I will start where I stopped. Mark, would you like to make your closing statements, please?
All right. So for me to reiterate what I made, a point I made earlier on, reforms, whether it's political, governance related, social reforms, are a marathon. They're not a sprint. And what we started with NSAS, it was an amazing. I think it was an amazing thing in the way young people spontaneously organized across most of the country and were quite united in one voice. It wasn't perfect. It will hardly ever be perfect. But I think we should use that as a launching pad, or to start pushing for the things we want to see change in our different spaces. We should not leave it to what we call activists. We are all activists. We should all be active citizens. They don't have to be the national issues, could be more granular issues, could be local issues, could be how do you engage with the police I mean, let's talk in the context of policing. Could be how do you engage the police outpost in your neighborhood or in your police station around in your locality? Could be the large issues, could be small issues, but we all can organize, can push, can be active, and we should also be can be informed about the things that are going on, and use that knowledge and with that knowledge and information, use that to know the right things to push for, where to push for them, and how to push for them. But it's not. It didn't end October last year. It's not ending now. It's a ongoing journey that will continue to that continues. So we should keep going at it and not rest on our oars at this point.
We must keep at it and not rest on our oars at this point. We must all be active citizens. We must occupy the spaces in which we have found ourselves, organize even within our neighborhoods. And you've touched on a very important issue, Mark, about community organizing. Organizing your community around even the small and little issues in your space, and then this expands to a whole big party. Thanks so much, Mark, for your thoughts. Chioma, are you ready for your final thoughts?
Yes, I think that my final thoughts would just be the need for us to be informed, the need for us to continue to seek knowledge. So you want to advocate for something. What do you know about that thing? What do you know about the laws in Nigeria that either enable or hinder the thing that you want to ask for? Who else has worked on that thing? Who can you collaborate with? I think that Nigeria is such a big country that, let's go, it always needs someone. So for me, it's just to, continue to seek knowledge. I think that knowledge is super important, so that in the name of advocating for something, you don't run foul of existing laws, and then you give government an excuse to, to do what they like to do, which is to harass people. So yes, that's that. The second thing I'll say is don't stop speaking. That I think that leans very nicely on what Mark said. Don't stop speaking. We've seen time and time again that our voices are powerful, our voices are useful, and our voices, when applied correctly and with the right amount of pressure and consistency, achieve impact. So don't stop speaking. Thank you very much to HBS for having me today.
Thank you so much, Chioma. I really like that. I think we should put that on an hashtag, and that should be the hashtag, the message we send out to young people in Nigeria on the first anniversary. Don't stop speaking. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Chioma. Brilliant as always. Thank you. Ndi, are you ready to go? Do you want to risk your camera or we keep it off?
Let me try. Can you see me?
You look beautiful as always. Yes, go on.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to use my last statement for Northern Nigeria, because there was a brief attempt at a conversation around carrying all regions along in these protests, and it was tilting towards Northern Nigeria, but I think we just left it hanging. Now, I don't want us to see Northern Nigeria as that dark spot that should not be engaged, right? I feel that civil society has a savior-victim relationship with Northern Nigeria, and I want us to look at a different approach for Northern Nigeria. With respect to NSAS, it felt like, yes, there was some resistance from the side of the country, but also there's that angle where I felt that we didn't look for common ground for where this affects this region. How can we speak the language that this region understands? Because it is a language that different people understand, or how it affects them and all of that people were reaching out to and communicating with. And we do not reach out to that place. We also still see, and this is not to sound, accusatory or anything, but we often see voices in Northern Nigeria rise up to speak against the system. And for those voices, the stakes are much higher. The punishment swift and more deadly. And whenever we see these voices, I don't think we engage it enough, or we need to keep looking at. There needs to be a reward for speaking up in Northern Nigeria. There needs to be a reward for being in these spaces and deciding to speak truth to power, and not pampering it, and not pampering the situation. So our approach to Northern Nigeria is key, because we can't say, oh, we're all fighting, and we leave one area like, oh, it's dark. When we finish, we'll go and help with empowerment. We'll go and try to see how we can get them out of poverty. No, people in Northern Nigeria, as we speak today, are protesting. Yesterday, they blocked road and burnt tire. The day before yesterday in Sokoto. They are speaking every day. They're not getting as much coverage in this same news that we're saying, oh, how do we get more of the media? They're not getting as much engagement. If you heard me speaking, oh, Southern Kaduna, people would reach out. They would reach out, they would hear a name. Oh, okay, where's she from? Oh, what's the name like? Oh, okay, this is somebody we can reach out to. We'll reach out to hear the issues. If we hear it is from, we'll reach out. It's the same way. People in these deep places are talking about these issues and we're not engaging enough. And at the end of the day, there are people who engage them, and it might not be on these issues. They engage them on other things, and these people are listened to. These are considered community leaders. So I feel like if we hear voices in Northern Nigeria that are speaking, saying things, speaking truth to power, saying things that we know, we understand, that we know these are issues, and if these people keep on speaking, they will see the change that they want to see. We need to platform those voices. We need to platform imams, alfas, sheikhs, people who speak to key issues. And there are people like that. There is one they call, is it the digital imam? He has been speaking. And we in civil society, we're not reaching out, we're not organizing around these people. And I do not think that we can reach into the heart of Northern Nigeria if we're not looking at these key issues, especially at a critical time like this. So I would end this with this. The North is not a dark space. We must engage the North beyond poverty alleviation and aid. And the North should not be pampered of its issues or out of its issues. We must discuss the critical issues there. We must look for common ground. Common ground. If it is that, okay, Northerners are saying police brutality is not the one at this time, NSAS was beyond that. And we must look for what is the one at this time that is doing them. What are the key issues? And have Northerners. It doesn't have to be from the elite group of Northerners. Which when we are seeing platform people, inclusivity, from this part of the country, it doesn't have to be the child of this, the child, and that is what we're seeing, the class divide, which is a larger class divide on that side of the country. It is that it's still elitist people that we're still looking to. So we need to break that down. We need to amplify voices. If we know, no matter how lowly a person is speaking, we need to start looking at Northern Nigeria from a point of power, from a point of people who have agency, people who can speak in whatever language they can speak, those who are doing it. Reach out to them, platform them, work with them, and see how we can get that region to come along. I know that they're doing their best, they're coming already, but we need much more from Northern Nigeria, and we need to re-strategize around that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indy. Very brilliant, to the point. This is one of the things that we got wrong with the NSAS protest, was the way we didn't reach Northern Nigeria. And you're right, every day there are protests going on in Northern Nigeria, in Kaduna, in Sokoto, in Zamfara, in Katsina, in Niger, and yet they're not getting the same hair time like other parts of the country are. It's time to bridge that divide. It's time we created platforms where we hear everyone's voices and that we reward those who speak up in the North and not pamper them at the same time, but ensure that we create that level ground where every voice is heard, where we're inclusive in the movement for Project Nigeria. Always brilliant, always hitting the nail on the head. Thank you so much, Indy Kato. Hamza, we will come to you now. Your final words, please. Are you there, Hamza?
Yes, I'm here. And I was born ready, but my internet can match my energy.
I know that. Your final words, please, at least for now.
I think that, yes, so for me, I think that the people that we have tagged hoodlums are the people we really need to reach out to. In the next couple of days, I would be leading a campaign at the motor parks and in the market. So the people you call Agbero hoodlums and the people that are readily available to politicians to mobilize during protests to attack their fellow youths are the people we need to take our sensitizations to. And I think that we need to consolidate as we lead various campaigns and share lessons and those challenges, because in those lessons and challenges that we share, other people will see them as emerging opportunities and can help us act. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamzat. So you want for us to also think, it's the same, I'm tying back to what Indy said about being inclusive and ensuring that we're able to also reach the other side and ensure that we're bringing more people in, especially those on the fences, the undecided, and the easier to sway. And I think it's very brave what you do, going to the multi-packs, going to the markets, rallying the youth to the right side of support for Project Nigeria. Thank you for all you do for this country. And thank you to every one of you who has spoken so brilliantly. And there are many points I'm taking away today. Some of the things I've heard today that will stay with me for a very long time is, I will start from what Hamzat said. He said, we need to ask ourselves as a country what exactly we want. And I have an idea of us drawing a vision board of the Nigeria of our dreams, and then our minds will pave the way to get there. Chioma has asked us to leverage technology in our battle for Project Nigeria. And they asked us to go beyond but this was Mark, for us to go beyond the streets for the long haul, that we need to get out there and ensure that after the streets, we also engage in participatory governance in the everyday things we do, organizing our neighborhoods around issues. PHCN, for example, picking up the trash in your neighborhood, getting quality education for public schools and for the children in your neighborhood might seem like simple things. Potable water might seem like simple things, but then they're the everyday things where governance continues to fail us. Then Indy and every single speaker today reminded us that this is not an event. The NSARS protest may have been an event, but this is a movement. It's longer than a sprint. It's longer than a marathon. It's an entire movement that we have had generations of Nigeria, first the ones who wanted independence, then the ones who wanted to end military rule, and from one thing to the other, and that when the torch is in our hands, we must protect the flame and pass it on. This is a long, according to Indy, this is a long journey. And that if we decide it will happen, then it will happen. Indy also reminded us to show up every day for the things that we want to see change. Show up every day for the things that we want to see change. And take Chioma's advice. Don't stop speaking. Thank you so much for our speakers who've been extraordinarily brilliant. I'm just going to hand over now to Shema for her closing remarks, and we will spend the next 7 days occupying Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. Thank you, everyone. It was indeed, the conversation made us think. It made us think deep. It made us realize that there is hope. I think that's what I'm living with here, with hope. For everyone who has spoken and for the work that you do, thank you. Thank you for not giving up on Nigeria, even though sometimes people say Nigeria is becoming more difficult to love. I think for us at HBS, we are living here knowing that there are people who are still passionate, who stay resilient, and who are consistent with their work. And that's the legacy that we are learning that the NSAS movement is taking forward. And so we say thank you. Thank you, Abby, for moderating so beautifully. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and asking the right questions. Thank you, Hamzat, for your passion. It shows through when you speak, and it's the passion you've used to continue to cause change that you have done so far with your work. Indy, we appreciate the work that you do in the political space. We appreciate the work you do in Northern Nigeria, and never been afraid to hide your voice and always speaking truth to power, as difficult as it is. Your voice is needed, and we appreciate that. And a happy birthday. Thank you for taking time out of your birthday to do this, because this is the legacy we talk about, caring so much about Nigeria to make certain sacrifices just so we can learn. And so we say thank you. Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for being a voice for the youth. We see you on Twitter. We see you here as well. We see that you have stayed consistent. And these are the legacies we're excited about. And we hope that younger people can, take from it, run with it, and keep going with it. Chioma, thank you as well for your voice. Thank you for the work that you do, the work that you do with women, the work that you do on the social media space, and even in putting Nigeria in the spotlight, putting Nigeria on the spot sometimes, and making Nigeria being accountable, just keeping all of us accountable. That's the legacy we're talking about. And I think what we are moving forward with from this meeting, especially for us at HBS, because we are thinking about how do we rethink politics in Nigeria? How do we think of politics outside of existing structures and outside of what exists, because we can see that that's probably not working and there's a need to do things differently. And just having this conversation helps us to know at the foundation that we're going in the right direction on rethinking politics. And we're excited about what the future holds for us. We are sad, a little bit dismayed about what exists, but we are hopeful that with voices like this, Nigeria will become easier to love. So thank you all so much. And before we go, I don't know, can the panelists please do a quick happy birthday song for Indy? Let's just do a quick happy birthday song. If you don't mind, we'll do a quick happy birthday song.
This would be the reason why we won't be in the choir, but then we're going to do it so that we'll never get asked to sing in public. That's it.
Thank you all. Thank you all. But birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy
birthday,
dear Indy.
Happy birthday to
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We see you, Indy. We appreciate your work. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Johan, do you have anything else to say?
No. All good. Thank you. I think that's a wrap.
Everyone.
No more to say.
Good afternoon. And keep us in the loop on what you're doing, please. We want to see your work.
Yes, I mean, obviously,
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch and see how we can extend that conversation. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And thank you to our participants too.